Crosscreed. It's been a while. I'm Casey Rochford. Why don't you like, share, subscribe, and definitely leave your comments. I think this one's going to get people talking. Let's do a little what if scenario. Hypothetically speaking, what if Carter won a second term? If Carter had secured a second term, the 1980s would have opened with a totally different vibe. Instead of Reagan's sweeping tax cuts, aggressive deregulation, and Cold War escalation, Carter's cautious pragmatism and focus on renewable energy conservation and diplomacy would have likely defined the decade. The Department of Energy, which he created, might have become a central driver of technological innovation and accelerating the adoption of solar and wind power decades before climate change entered mainstream political discourse. America's dependence on foreign oil could have been decreased much earlier, potentially averting some of the Middle Eastern entanglements that shaped later administrations. On the global stage, Carter's human rights-focused foreign policy would probably have continued to soften U.S. relations with developing nations and the Soviet bloc. His emphasis on diplomacy over militarization might have delayed or transformed the late Cold War. A Carter-led response to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan might have focused on multinational pressure and sanctions rather than the covert arming of insurgents, meaning no CIA-backed mujahideen and no rise of extremist offshoots like Al-Qaeda. Domestically, the Reagan Revolution never takes hold. The Christian right remains influential, but lacks the galvanizing figure that Reagan provided, so the cultural conservatism never really achieves the same dominance in the 1980s. Labor unions remain somewhat stronger, inequality grows more slowly, and trickle-down economics never becomes the prevailing orthodoxy. America might have entered the 1990s with a more balanced approach to markets and social welfare, perhaps resembling Northern models. By the time the Berlin Wall fell, and I think it still would have fallen because that mostly had to do with Gorbachev, even though Reagan had that cool one-liner, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down the wall. But anyway, by the time the wall fell, a second-term Carter would have left a legacy of cautious diplomacy, environmental foresight, and moral leadership. Critics would still accuse him of timidity and economic mismanagement, but in hindsight, historians might credit him with steering the U.S. toward a more sustainable, less polarized path. An America less obsessed with military might and more invested in cooperation, technology, and human rights. Wouldn't that be nice? Now, in this hypothetical scenario, if Reagan hadn't run, and given that he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 1994 and one of his sons had the conjecture that perhaps he was showing signs during his presidency, who do you think would have run after Carter completed his second term? Why don't you put your ideas in the comments? Was it Gary Hart and Jesse Jackson versus George H.W. Bush and his plucky sidekick? Tell me what you think. Maybe I'll do another video.